Everyone knows that Baldur's Gate 3 is amazing. It's kind of a foregone conclusion at this point. You hear Baldur's Gate 3, you go, oh yeah, it's that awesome game that won all these awards and deserved every single one of them, right? Well, one of the most common things that I've had to do recently with my friends and family is explain to them just why Baldur's Gate 3 is so good. Because when everybody's saying that it's great, it doesn't really do anybody any favors, especially if you're already on the outside of that group and you don't understand why it's so great. And when I'm live streaming over on Luke Stevens Live, my second channel for streams and clips and stuff, which you should definitely check out when you get a chance, I get asked this question all the time. People coming in and wondering whether this is a game they should try, what makes it so special, blah de blue de blah blah. So today I figured it would be fun to showcase what I think, in my humble opinion, is the most impressive and amazing thing about Baldur's Gate 3. The one thing it does that almost no other games in a single decade managed to pull off. And that is pure, unbridled freedom and agency. You see, in any video game, there's a balancing act that has to take place where the developers are trying to decide between how much freedom they give the player and how many rules and like training wheels and safety railings they put on the experience to keep you going down the path that they need you to go down to have the best time. The easiest example of this trade-off would be in, say, a narrative game like The Last of Us. You have a lot of freedom in how you go through levels, but at the end of the day, you can't actually influence the story. You can't kill off main characters that you might need for future story sequences. There are limitations to what you can do, but those limitations are put in place in order to service the overall experience of the game. Or in the case of other RPGs or open world adventure games, there might be certain challenges or puzzles that you face, but usually there's only one or two ways of dealing with those difficulties. If you're playing a game like Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which is a massive open world adventure game in its own right, you can be faced with a major boss fight, and usually there's only two ways of dealing with it. Either you fight the boss and defeat him, or you find another way to perhaps talk your way out of it, avoiding a violent confrontation completely. But in Baldur's Gate 3, there are so many ways for you to handle any situation under the sun. It frankly is headache inducing. There was a phenomenal video put together by Momo O'Brien. If you're not subscribed to her, I highly recommend you go check out her channel. But she did this video, how I got immersed in Baldur's Gate 3 like 3 months ago, breaking down why the game is so good in her opinion. And it's a fantastic watch. I'll have it linked below. You should definitely check it out. But one of the things she breaks down is the goblin camp encounter and all of the different varying ways you can take on that challenge. And she asked her community for input on how it worked and how they were able to overcome the challenge and their perspective. And it's absolutely crazy, the variability of options and approaches. It's absolutely mind-boggling. Or should I be punny? It's absolutely mind-goblining. Okay, it didn't land. You know what? It sounded funny in my head. I was like, goblining, but it didn't land. But we're gonna keep it in because I need to learn from this and grow. So we're leaving it in, as cringe as it is. For example, you can get through this goblin camp by poisoning the punch bowl in the middle of the camp. You basically go in there, drop some poison into it if you can sneak your way over there. And once you've done that, all of the goblins will go drink after you give a toast to the camp, and they all drop dead, poisoned. It's crazy. Or you can just waltz your way into the goblin camp, and if you're a drow, they just let you in. Otherwise, you have to pass a couple of persuasion checks, and then you're let in like it's no big deal. The goblins can also tease you and try to trick you into smearing poop on your face, and if you do that, you'll be allowed in, and everybody will laugh at you as they talk to you. Or you can use the horn given to you by the ogres that you meet in the Blighted Village, and they'll be called in to assist you if you choose to go in guns a-blazing and take everybody out before heading into the inner areas to take on the goblin leadership. I've seen other clips of people going and placing oil barrels all over the encampment and then launching one singular fireball at one of them, causing everything to explode, killing absolutely everybody in a huge fireball of glory. Like seriously, if you can think of something and you're like, maybe this could work, maybe I could deal with that problem in this creative way, it will work. They have accounted for so many things. It is frankly outrageous. And because the systems they've built are so robust, you can get away with a lot of stuff you probably shouldn't get away with, but that makes it all the more amazing. Because at its core, the thing that Baldur's Gate 3 does best is that it allows you to break the game, to use your player agency to come up with creative solutions to problems. Even if that might make the game like more fragile, it can break, you can ruin your save if you happen to screw up and end up killing somebody you need to progress the main story. They let you do that because they want this world to feel real, to feel as though you can actually make a difference in it and change it. And it's so robust that you actually can. Quick little like spoiler warning, though not really, for one of the final bosses of Act 2 at the very end of it. Like, seeing this is not going to spoil anything, but if you didn't want to know what the arena looks like, I guess consider this a spoiler. But that being said, let me show you what somebody was able to do 4 months ago that absolutely blew up the community. To set this up, you need to understand that Astarion can run with what's known as a Twist of Fortune mace. It's a really simple object that doesn't seem that crazy at first. It's only a rare. It's not like a very rare item. It's just rare. Doesn't seem that crazy. It has Heart Stomper, smash an enemy's chest in, possibly inflict chest trauma. That's cool. That will mean that they have disadvantage on Constitution saving throws and they have one less action. That could be super useful. It has Concussive Smash, which can cause daze on the target, which is super cool. But the particular perk that people found the most interesting was this one down here, Blood Money. Strike out greedily, dealing additional proficiency bonus piercing damage per 300 gold that the target possesses. The gold will be consumed. What does this mean? Well, if the target has 300 gold in their inventory and you use this weapon, it will deal an additional amount of piercing damage equal to the proficiency bonus for the character using the weapon. Do you see where this is going? Yeah, somebody went in and pickpocketed a major boss for the end of Act 2, and this is what's known as a reverse pickpocket, where you pickpocket the target, but you're putting something in their inventory instead of taking it out. So they placed 15,000 gold coins into Ketheric's inventory, and then using the Twist of Fortune mace, they struck him, causing an absolute monstrosity of damage, one-shotting the boss and causing him to just drop dead. Like, absolute madness. It's crazy. Another player also did this with a late game boss and did some other boosts and perks to give themselves higher likelihood of landing critical hits. And after placing 87,000 gold into the end game boss's pockets, they did a total of minimum 1d8 plus 1 plus 1,160 damage to the boss, which is enough to one-shot like pretty much anything in 5th edition of D&D and as a result Baldur's Gate 3 in addition. The only way a boss could get out of this is if they had an armor set that did like a flat damage reduction for each individual attack coming in, which, for example, Ketheric, his armor does, but after he changes form, it no longer has that armor, so then he just takes the raw damage. But this number does not even include the potential for critical hits, which would increase this number even higher to like 1,300 to 1,400 total damage taken with a single shot. Now, granted, it consumes the gold during the course of this, and my understanding is that's something they patched in. They still wanted players to be able to do this if they really wanted to, but they decided that you shouldn't be able to just reverse pickpocket in like 87,000 gold coins into a boss's pocket, kill them one shot, and then take it back out of their inventory. So it consumes the gold now when it happens. It kind of burns up as a result of the piercing damage, but still, it's a crazy cool way that you could one-shot a final late game boss just because you came up with a creative way of doing it. It's awesome. But this is one of those things that a lot of other developers might like steer clear of allowing the player to do. A lot of other developers might be like, no, this is the big final boss fight. We've spent a lot of time and money developing this fight. It's going to be awesome. It's like 5 phases. We're not going to let the player just bypass it all with a single shot. But that's exactly what Larian did with Baldur's Gate. They're like, hey, if the player can come up with a creative way to one-shot a boss and deal like 1,200 damage in a single blow, they probably earned the right to just skip the rest of the boss fight. That's just awesome. So they let him do it, and I think it's great. Now, okay, the next little thing I'm gonna show you has since been patched out, allegedly. I have not tried it since the latest patch, but it did work in the game for a good long while. And I'm gonna show it to you because it just shows how robust these game systems are, that you can kind of push and prod and sort of break stuff, and the game doesn't have any immediate fail safes. They'll let you do it even though it's a little weird. Let me just show you. So this has to do with our good friend Karlach, which this is a little gruesome, a little rough, but it shows you just how cool and robust these systems are. You basically are tasked very early on in the game with going and finding this character who's causing trouble for another NPC you find, and they task you with killing her, bringing her head back, and then you'll get this cool sword. Really simple and straightforward. Upon arriving, you realize it's Karlach, and if you've seen any promotional stuff for the game, you realize this is one of your potential companions. So you can either choose to still kill her and get that cool sword, or you can let her go, recruit her as a companion, as a barbarian companion early in the game, which is a huge benefit since the early game is very heavily like in favor of melee. Melee's kind of OP in the early game. So you can choose which way you want to go. However, players realized a few months ago that you could get kind of the best of both worlds and also a really funny outcome as well. You see, what you do is you go up to the body after you've killed Karlach with your party, and then you have to select the remove head option and then switch to a different playable character on your team, revive her, switch back to the character that's currently in dialogue, select to remove her head after she's technically been revived, and then after the somewhat gruesome little sequence plays out, you then switch back and you will see a version of Karlach that is fully functional, can talk and walk and do whatever without any restrictions, but that no longer has a head. And you can play through the entire game with a headless Karlach without any issue. Like it would just work. This is a video from Pickle Time, who put this together like 2 months ago, back in October, and they did a great job just quickly showing how it works. And I gotta hand it to them. It's kind of crazy. Now, like I said, since this, they have patched it out. You can no longer do it. But if you were to play an older version of the game, you could actually play through the whole thing. My understanding is, at least, that you could do it with a headless Karlach, with her like delivering dialogue, going through like emotional cutscenes and everything, just without a head on top of her model, which I find really funny. Granted, this was an exploit, but it was an example of how the game was built in a way where it allowed for players to do things in creative orders to bypass certain consequences and certain outcomes. And I just find it really funny. So even if it doesn't prove the point of this video that well, I still wanted to share it. And then this last one is something that I've experimented with, and people are always asking me like, what kind of games do you play in your spare time? What do you do in your spare time when you're working on like critiques and videos and stuff? And a lot of the time it's just me screwing around with stuff, trying to break it, seeing how robust the game actually is, and if it will put up with my stupider decisions. Quick little spoiler warning towards the end of Act 2. Again, I'm not going to go into any story details or anything revealing any major plot points, but it is an area and you're going to see a character that you might not have seen otherwise, so I'll just try to keep it vague, but I guess be warned that there are technically spoilers that you'll see. So what you need to understand is at this point in the game, at this particular save file, we are dealing with a big scary character over here. Players who have not done the sequence before will just see a big scary character and think that they're about to go into combat with him. So I was like, what would a player do here? Well, they would probably try to get some sort of advantage against this big scary boss looking character that's right up in front of us, right? So I decided to have Shadowheart go and cast Polymorph. And Polymorph, as you can see, is a level 4 transmutation spell. And when it succeeds, in other words, when the target fails a wisdom saving throw, that target is transformed and polymorphed into a little baby sheep with 3 health points, which means that if this succeeds, you can just straight up bypass entire boss fights, so long as they don't have like immutable form, which is an ability or perk that a character can have in the D&D universe, which means that they can't have this happen to them. They can't be polymorphed into something else. But guess what? Our friend right here does not have that ability. So I cast it on him, and sure enough, he fails the save, gets transformed into a sheep, And then when I walk close, the cutscene triggers. And I mean, I'm not gonna spoil it. I'm just gonna let this play and you can just watch as this plays out with like dialogue and everything, and then just a floating sheep randomly. Just randomly there. Just floating in the background, you can see him. But he's still there as a sheep in the cutscene. And like, you can see the camera movements are still rigged. Doesn't quite make sense. She's just drop kicking a sheep. It's just outrageous. The whole thing is outrageous. When I got this working, I was just genuinely stunned that it worked.
Before you do anything.
And then he talks to you. And then he talks to you. I'm not joking. There's like an entire dialogue sequence where you're supposed to be talking to the Mind Flayer, but instead you're just talking to a gigantic, monstrous sheep person. So the dialogue will carry out with him as a sheep, since he was transformed into it. His skeleton and like rig will morph him into a standing up, like humanoid looking sheep with his legs on backwards. It's really, really disturbing and disorienting, but it works. The game will let you do it. And then this whole dialogue sequence plays out with him as a weird monster demon sheep. And then he drops back down to normal. It's just so stupid, and I love it so much. But this is the magic of D&D, except it's been translated into a video game, and it still kind of works. The crazy thing about D&D is that if you go, I'm gonna try this outrageous thing, and I'm gonna turn this boss into a sheep, and then I wanna chuck the sheep off the cliff. The DM is like, okay, well, I planned this whole boss fight, but I guess you can try. And then if you roll well enough, and the opponent rolls badly enough, that can happen. There are no limitations, really, in most instances, on what can or can't happen. It's just up to your imagination, and that's also true in this game. And before anybody asks, yes, of course I tried it with another boss as well. And it does work with other bosses. Again, story spoilers for the same rough general area of the game, because I just wanted to see if they let you do it with all of these characters. And you can, in fact, do it with all of them. With this one, we're in the middle of combat, and I was like, yeah, you know what, Gale died. I'm down to just try some wacky stuff. So I tried polymorph on our friend here that I will not go into too much detail on, just in case you don't want spoilers. He failed his wisdom saving throw, gets transformed into a sheep, and then once it's back to my player character's turn, he shoves the sheep and is able to use a pushing attack, and it succeeds. And then he gets knocked all the way down into oblivion. And you would think, hey, maybe the developers would not let you like polymorph it so that its strength stat drops, such that now it's really easy to shove off a cliff. But no, they let you do it, and it's freaking fantastic. And I even tried it again before you engage him in discussion and dialogue, triggering the big combat encounter where he brings all of these undead to help him fight. And you can actually cast polymorph on him while he's just there, not aggroed on anything. And if he fails his wisdom saving throw, he gets transformed into the sheep, runs off, and tries to fight you one-on-one as a sheep. You can just like either try to pick him up and throw him, or you can go and shove him off the cliff. It's actually easier to shove than to pick him up and throw him, but you could pick him up and throw him if you wanted to. And once you've done that, you can just shove him off. He goes flying, he dies, it's over, and you bypass fighting all of the other guys. You just straight up skip a massive boss fight with tons of extra enemies helping him, just because you did it in a different order. So he's a sheep, therefore he can't cast the spells to bring up all the undead, so you can just bypass it and then you're just chucking a sheep off a cliff. It's crazy. But this is what I mean. Like, just ask yourself, when was the last time you played a video game and you came up with some way of doing something that you don't think anybody else has tried, or you haven't seen anybody else try, and it's just so crazy cool that you want to clip it and send it and share it with your friends. Like, when was the last time you did that? Maybe you had a really cool quick scope or something in Call of Duty. Maybe you got the dub in Fortnite or something like that. But like, it's a pretty rare thing to be playing a game and for something so cool to happen that you think of it for days and days or weeks. I'm going to remember this for years, no doubt. I probably am never gonna forget this. Like, this was so crazy and stupid that it's just funny and very, very memorable. But listen, that is the magic of Baldur's Gate 3, that they enable players to think creatively and come up with crazy solutions to problems that you would never think would work. And yet they do, because they put the dice in your court or hands, or whatever the analogy would require. They leave it up to you to tell the story in whatever way you want. If it's the way that they kind of broadly outlined it, great. But if you choose to go along and like delete one of the endgame bosses, just deletus him right off of this astral plane because you came up with this really cool way of maximizing damage, awesome. If you decide instead that you don't want to use any of these other like combat perks and stuff, or the illithid powers because it hurts your roleplay and you want to roleplay as somebody trying to remain pure and unaffected by that, you can do that. And the game is just as viable as it would be otherwise. And I think the thing that I find most impressive about all of this is that it shows a real confidence in the player to enable them to do whatever they want, to give them all of these tools, and to just let them play. You know, it shows that they have a lot of confidence in their player base, coming up with creative solutions, coming up with ways of dealing with these problems that they'll be presented with, and figuring out how to get around those problems. A lot of other developers, it feels so often like they need to handhold everybody through every encounter because they don't trust that they'll be able to figure it out themselves, or because they don't feel as though the player will figure it out unless they have 15 objective markers and all these explanations and tutorials popping up all the time, and then an NPC saying, oh, by the way, have you tried solving the puzzle this way? Try that. Like, it drives me crazy. But in Baldur's Gate, they're just like, nah, here it is. Go have fun. Figure it out. And I understand why some people might find that sort of free roam gameplay design kind of overwhelming, because frankly, it is overwhelming. But by God, once you learn to embrace it and you learn kind of how the tools work within the game itself, it just turns Baldur's Gate 3 into a massive playground where you can just do whatever you want, where you can figure it out in any way you want. And the replayability is off the charts. And I can't stop gushing about it. I could be here talking about it for hours and hours on end, and I would never shut up. So I'll stop there to save your ears from having to deal with my sick voice any further. But let me know what your favorite part of Baldur's Gate 3 is in the comment section below. And if you have not tried it, comment down below as well and tell the community what your holdup is, what you like or don't like about it. And who knows, maybe somebody will be able to convince you to give the game a shot. You never know. I don't have any sponsors or anything for this video. It's just myself. So if you enjoyed it, please hit the subscribe button, like the video. And if you want a really cool shirt, LukeStevensTV.com. Again, LukeStevensTV.com. Just look it up. Hype makes you stupid. Never has a more true word been spoken than what I just said. Hype makes you stupid. It's kind of a catchphrase around here. The only game you're allowed to be hyped for is Baldur's Gate 4, if that ever happens. By God, can you imagine if we got a Baldur's Gate 4 anytime in the next decade? I would lose it. But that's all from me. Thank you for watching. I love you all dearly. Again, remember, like, subscribe, blah, blah, blah. I love you. I'll see you in the next one. Hugs and kisses. Bye-bye.